Welcome back, listeners, to another episode of the Inspired Writer Collective. I'm your host, Elizabeth, and I'm so excited to introduce you to Jillian Forsberg. She is a historical fiction writer, also a mom, a dog owner. She owns a bridal shop, so she is a busy woman, but she has successfully published her debut book, which is The Rhino Keeper. Again, historical fiction. So, we're going to be talking to you today, Jillian, about what that process was like. One of the things I really resonated with you on is the way that you have such a passion for giving a voice to little known people and characters throughout history, because that's the premise that Stephanie and I have operated under in regards to adding guests to our podcast. We feel like it's important to provide a platform, even for those who haven't made it big. And I think your story, especially of your publishing journey, will be really helpful for others to hear and understand that there are ways to get published without agents, and there's a number of different avenues that you can take to getting your work out there. So, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you so much. I'm so happy to be here. I've been looking forward to this for weeks now, and I feel like what you do on your podcast, it also really resonates with me. And I think exactly what you said, like we talk about these smaller moments in history or people who weren't royal or weren't famous, and I often find connection with them because that's us, right? And so you're right. When I first started writing The Rhino Keeper, I was like, this is so interesting. I just need this main character to have left behind some kind of a journal or to have like a record in a court somewhere. And then I realized something that was really kind of sad, that most common people in history, if they did not leave behind something tangible that lasted, then we will literally forget them because there's no one to completely tell their story again. So doing things like this podcast, I think, are not just important for, getting the word out about books and memoir and historical fiction and things like that, but it's also super important because we want people to remember that even if you didn't sell 100,000 copies of your debut novel, you still have something to say. And that's pretty much what I felt like with the Rhino Keeper the whole time. Even though the main character literally left behind no journal. And let me tell you, if I owned the only rhino on the continent of Europe, I would write a journal like every day. Like, this is what she did today, right? No, the man left nothing. I have like one signature of his that I definitely have saved to my phone in my favorites album. And I feel like there are things that he did that I have record of from the royal courts, from art, things like that that do make it remarkable, but he was so common. And I think that's like an allegory for everything we do. Even though people are common, it doesn't mean they didn't do important things.
Or even like, certainly in that case, important things, but in the bigger scheme of things, relatable things, right? Like you just said, you relate more to these kind of characters than to the royalty or to the, people that had notoriety or some sort of famous aspect to their story. And I mean, that I instantly just go to like, yeah, this is why we journal. This is why if you have a story you want to share, you publish that memoir, like this is your legacy you're leaving behind when you're no longer here to tell your story. How is your story going to be told? Luckily, some people in history have you to tell their story.
Yes. And I think about that all the time. Like, how do we know what happened in the past with common people? And the answer is often newspapers. So if you make the news, amazing. But a lot of people back then made the news in scary or bad ways. Um, Religious books. So like those family Bibles are so important, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I love looking back at those from my own family. But one of the other big things that I was just thinking about lately was oral history and how we hear these stories from our grandparents and our mothers, and they hear them from their mothers and their grandparents, and that line goes on and on and on. But who's going to remember to write that down? Who's going to
Mm-hmm.
think, this is a story my grandpa used to tell me all the time that happened to him, and now he's gone? Will you tell your child about that? And then how will it get distorted over time? So the memoir, the journal, the photographs, the daily documentation of basic things, I think, is so important. One of the things that I did in early motherhood, and I can't believe I had the brain to do this, um, I had a journal given to me by my aunt, and my aunt told me that I should write something every day about my child. And I did
Mm-hmm.
for 5 years. So
You stuck with it longer than I did. I had a calendar, and my
yes.
goal was to mainly write the firsts, like all the firsts that were
Ugh.
happening, because there's so many, especially in the first like year or two. And I think I did about 2 years. But like I would note like so and so came to visit the new
Mhm.
baby, or this is the first time I heard her giggle, or stuff like that. And I still have those calendars. So you don't have to
Yeah,
use a fancy like journal, like even something like that is perfectly suitable. But
it
that's
is.
great
And
you did it
my
for 5
Ye
years.
well, I still can't believe I did it for 5 years, but it just became part of my daily habit.
Mhm,
Like, I felt like I had to step outside of my day to remember how
mhm,
important those days were. It's literally in
mhm,
my fire safe now because it's so important to me to keep that. And not only is it like a memory jogger for me because, we forget what we did on a daily basis, but for my child in, like, 10 years, when she's looking back on her own childhood, she gets to literally see the first 5 years of her life because as we know, memory is very strange. We won't know. We won't remember anything. Even as
mhm,
adults, I'm like, "Wow, I have no idea that we did that, and yet I wrote it down." So, I think, that really when I think about it, that started the routine that I have every single day now of writing in earnest for an hour or working on my writer career, and there's those are 2 separate things. Sometimes I'm, like, working on a presentation and sometimes I'm actually drafting and sometimes I'm editing and sometimes I'm just answering emails. But that sacred hour where you get to actually hone in on that mental part of you that needs to get word out somehow, I think is so important for writers to actually incorporate.
mhm, absolutely. The concept of writing something down for each day reminds me of some advice that I read in Storyworthy by Matthew Dix. He does all of the moth storytelling competitions, and one of the ways that he generates, ideas for his stories is every day he writes down what the most like story-worthy moment of the day was.
Mhm,
And he just
mhm.
writes like a couple of sentences just to be able to jog his memory of that, and then at some point when he needs another story he'll go back through his journal that sits beside his bed of these like story worthy moments to pull out something to really flesh out into like some spoken word personal narration and stuff, which is
I
I think you could
love
do something
that.
similar. Yeah.
Yes, and I love the moth. If we have any
Mhm.
writers listening who need some inspiration or they're about to give a presentation and they need some help on like how to format it, go listen to any episode of The Moth. The Moth is the best storytelling in short format. You never know what you're going to get. You never know who's going to be on that stage. And there's every single time I laugh hysterically and then I end up getting a
You
little
may
teary eyed in the
cry.
same episode. Yes. It's so well done. And
Yeah.
I think in this digital age, the oral storytelling piece of our lives is
Mhm.
often forgotten and it's not nearly as valued until you see somebody get up on stage and they tell an incredible story, or you listen to a podcast and they tell an incredible story. And then you have this human guttural response where you're like, oh, I needed that. And I think that's because our brains are so receptive to hearing someone's voice, to hearing the cadence and rhythm of how we speak, and that I think is part of what I absolutely love about public speaking. I just gave a presentation on Wednesday at this incredible women organization called The Hive here where I live in Wichita. And at the end, the ladies were all like, "Did you practice this? This was incredible." And I said, "No, I don't need to practice my own writing journey story. I don't need to practice to tell you how I've worked in bridal for 15 years at the same store. I don't need to practice those things. They're literally part of my soul and psyche." And I think as a historical fiction author, that's what I'm trying to get across is that even though this common person didn't remember to write anything down, or maybe they did and it was just destroyed by time, um, I think about the Library of Alexandria all the time for that
Right.
reason and all the crap that was
Oof.
burned. Anyway, that's my Roman Empire. Um, those types of things where I can take a small memory of someone and reinterpret it into us understanding and connecting with a person who lived for, in my case, 250 years ago, that becomes so significant to me because it's almost like I've breathed life back into them and said, like we talked about at the beginning, nothing is less important than people doing normal things. And normal things is why we still exist. And he did extraordinary things. I mean, he had a rhino in 18th century Europe. Like, good luck, buddy.
I'm curious how you feel like this like era of podcasting is going to impact future historical fiction writers. Like imagine if you had these sort of things, like someone actually speaking, and sharing their story and a recording of it, like even just the legacy and posterity of it. Like it
Yeah.
seems like for future writers there would be a treasure trove of
Yes.
resources.
So I have a master's degree in public history, and what that means is I studied museums, archive, preservation, that kind of thing. And one of the biggest things that we learned about was how to go back and search through record to find either things that you were trying to prove or things that you were trying to disprove. And it's so funny, you just trigger like, if I'm ever teaching a college class in 10 years, I'll be like, "Well, have you looked at the podcast archives to see if they were ever on a podcast?" Can you imagine if, like, J.R.R. Tolkien was just casually talking to, like, somebody who was just, all of a sudden where they needed to be? I mean, if we go back and look at, like, the podcast archives, that piece of storytelling from person to person is gonna be huge, but it also can give you so much more, and these are the things that as a historical fiction author that I really wish I had. The color of someone's eyes, the way that their mouth moves when they speak, the way that they laugh, just their physical appearance that isn't a portrait, and in my case, I have, like, one portrait of my lesser known people that I write about. The animals I have tons of, but animals are different from people, and I think about this all the time. Animal to animal, like rhino to rhino, there's very few that's really distinctly different about them. Cat to cat, you better believe there's lots of different things. Person to person, how am I supposed to know if this person, you know, chortled when they laughed or when they cried, they only had tears out of the left side or what their ears looked like if there's nothing left of them? So, in the future, the podcast archives, not just valuable for the words that we say, but for the actual visuals that we give. Hopefully, someone who's archiving and, maybe not fictionalizing, but maybe fictionalizing our own lives in the future, but it's also this snapshot of time. So, if you wanna go back to 2012, and listen to podcasts back then, you can hear the technology change. You can
Mhm.
see the video quality. So you're also getting things that are desperately different from today, and it gives you this idea what's in the background. What are they wearing? What does their hair look like? Are they drinking coffee out of a mug? Do they have, some kind of thing around them that can help you build a scene and a setting? So, am I jealous of the 2075 writers? Yes, I am. Because I don't have those. I can go to art museums and I can, look in the archives where I have to translate everything and read cursive writing, and if they can understand the way that we speak, they have a treasure trove waiting for them in the future.
But how much would that steal, like, the art and creativity side of historical fiction, where you then get to take what is basically just a template of a person and then imagine what color their eyes are, or give them these different characteristics to then maybe aid and mold, your story, or impart sympathy from the reader for certain things, or give them some distinct flaws that help, make the story make sense in your mind? Would that not, like, just take away from some of the art of it? Because that seems really cool too, to be able to take someone who is a
Honey.
historical figure but have only enough about them to know that they existed in some basic timeline of their life and some key events maybe, and be able to put your own sort of impression on them.
I think you just hit the nail on the head. The key event is the whole focus there. Most of the time, unless we are a heavily documented person, our key moments will not be recorded. So if you go back, let's say we are in 2075, and you go back and you want to look at you and I in this podcast, you can tell when we sat down, and when we started talking to each other, what our day might have been like, but you don't actually know. And you know, if you go back to the past, and like one of the most significant things that's happened to me recently, had to go to the ER because I had an allergic reaction to something. There were no cameras on me. So how would you have known? And how would you have known that this morning I was woken up by 2 of my 3 cats, and, then I went and stretched in the back bedroom with my husband, and then I took a shower, and what song did I sing in the shower? So you
Mm-hmm.
still you still have to imagine some things, and because we're not on the Truman Show, it's almost impossible for us to know what that person's life was truly like, and on top of that, there's always this little characteristic twist that we can put on people. Let's say I'm the villain in someone's story, and they're watching me give this podcast talk and talking to you, and then they think later on, "Well, she turned all of that magic off." and something switched inside of her brain and something nasty happened, right? So the imagination and art will be there, but what will really happen is you'll have a whole bunch of people who can prove you wrong. And that's one of the reasons that I like writing about people and animals because A, you can't tell me what the animal did because you weren't there in 1740. And the person who didn't write anything down about their life, your assumption is just as good as mine. In fact, in my second book, I was lucky enough to get an ARC, an early reader copy of Tim Blanning's Augustus the Strong biography. Augustus the Strong was a king in Poland and an elector of Saxony in Germany in the early 18th century. And I really wanted to focus on one of his mistresses. In one of his wills and testaments, he left an $8,000 allowance to one mistress, and he had like recorded mistresses about a dozen. Unrecorded maidens, wenches, cooks, servants. Your guess is as good as mine, right? If you're going to have a dozen recorded mistresses, imagine how many other women you took advantage of. Anyway, the biographer, I was searching and searching for more information about her because she was a common person. Her name was Fatima. The biographer said something that absolutely just ripped my guts out. It said, there is so little known about her that anything that could be written could be true. We have one portrait. We know that she had two of this king's bastard children. We know she was stolen as a child during a war. She was literally a war prize. And yet, this woman did so many things. She gained the king's attention after she was a handmaiden for another one of his mistresses, and somehow she earned $8,000 allowances. Something's up. Something's up, right? So I'm like, I have all of these clues, all of these things that can lead me to assumptions about her and that one striking portrait, but I don't have anything else to go off of. That means that I can characterize her in a couple of different ways, but I have to make those decisions. And for me, that part of that is listening to the past, um, finding out what it looked like there. I got to physically go where that king's palace was and explore and feel the stones beneath my feet and my hands and say, okay, she was here. Was she afraid? Was she excited? There are just so many things that we will never be able to fully emote, even in this highly recorded world, simply because our own rich inner worlds are not something that we could ever truly put down on paper. And I think that that's something that's both wonderful and sad because the truth is historical fiction will always be around because we always have questions about why the past relates to us. But in the thought of becoming our own historical fiction, maybe 100 years from now, it almost makes you want to just go back and start writing more things down so that they don't get anything wrong about you, you know? But that also brings up the fact that you could be the hero in your own story and you are definitely the villain in somebody else's. And that realization, right, whether you're doing memoir or historical fiction or just journaling, you made amends with someone who still sees you as the bad guy, or you'll never make amends with someone who sees you as the bad guy. And how are people going to interpret that? I know that there are a lot of villains in history who had one person write one nasty thing about them, and then their reputation is ruined for all eternity because that person wrote it down. So that's a really roundabout way of answering your question, but essentially, I think emotion can never be fully understood unless you've experienced it yourself. And I also think that as we go through time, people evolve into the era in which they live. And your reaction to what I might do today in 2025 is going to be way different from what my characters did in 1725.
Absolutely. Well, and I even love that you touched on that because that's one of those key things that people who are interested in maybe writing memoir or sharing their story in some way hesitate about because they recognize sort of the innate fallacy of memory or even just their slant on their narrative. And there are going to be certainly people that held you back from reaching certain goals and objectives in your life. And so there can be a lot of reservation for writers about putting that story out there and like, oh, how will they feel about this? And the reality is everyone is able to write their own story. And so, just as you have a right to share your story and write it in the way that you see it, just know and acknowledge that they also have the right to write it how they saw it. And all of that is valuable and important and interesting.
When our brains protect us to protect our hearts, we don't want to be perceived as bad, no matter who we are or what we have done. And I think when we know that we've done wrong, sometimes writing about that or going to therapy about that or just talking about something that we did make a huge mistake on, whatever that might be, it doesn't have to be shared publicly, but being able to go back and interpret those things for our own well-being is so, so important. And I think there's a lot of people who do that in memoir or do that in journaling or for me, like I was just thinking the other day because I'm drafting a new book right now, and I'm like, okay, that person did that really mean thing to me 2 years ago, and I can replay those words in my brain. Boom, boom, boom. I have it memorized. I don't know why we do that to ourselves, but I literally have really mean things memorized. I'm gonna write that into a character and have that character say almost the exact same thing. The person will have no idea ever that I've really focused on that and characterizing my own bad guy in this story. But at the same time, don't we need to do that? Don't we need to get it out somehow?
Mhm.
And we also, like I said, our brains protect us. If our brain is saying, I can't stop thinking about this thing, and that's probably something that we need to go back and work on, both personally and professionally, to make sure that it doesn't cloud everything that we do in the future. We have to be able to learn to let go. And for me, that's writing about it. And I think that's where my morning pages, my hours spent on my writing career, they come in so key for me when I've gone through something traumatic, grief, loss, an argument, anything like that, I can get it out. So it's not just a creative outlet. It's not just I'm writing books for my author career. It's also a way for me to literally self therapize myself. And my therapist is like, well, you can always talk to me too. And I'm like, thank you, Cindy. I know. But sometimes you just have to rework those conversations, right? And do it on page. And that way you can control the narrative. And most of us creatives, I think, are pretty anxious people. And a lot of the reason that we're anxious is because we feel like we don't have any control. So, what if you took that nasty person that was mean to you, who was probably scared in their own right, and you rewrote that conversation in a way that makes you proud of yourself? You don't ever have to share it. But I do that in dialogue sometimes when I'm writing my books. It feels really good, really good to be able to do that.
I love that. Yeah, there's so much just personal therapy that goes with sharing your story and writing your story. Um, I you had mentioned the several times like the hour that you carve out, and that was another thing that you and I really resonated with each other about. I at one point, I guess it was last year, I was still had my, full day to do whatever writing I felt like
Ah,
doing, and I would wait for the inspiration to come. And then I got a job in last August, and all of a sudden, what I had was typically about 40 minutes between leaving my job and before I had to pick up my daughter from school. And the amount of writing and work that I've put into my book since then has been astronomical compared to what I did when I had all this free time in the world.
mhm.
And so when you talk about, just having this hour that you use for whether it's writing or promoting yourself as an author or doing whatever you need to do in your writer business, um, I would love for you to talk a little bit about the impact that that's had on you, how important that is to you, and just provide for our listeners an idea of a sort of different path that also works. Like you don't have to have these huge chunks of time or set aside these like sprint weekends or anything else.
I love that you realized that. And I think most of us work better on a deadline. And so there's some newer authors who don't have a deadline yet. And that's okay. But if you really want to write a book and you think to yourself, I just don't have time. My question for you is, what are you doing in your morning routine?
Mhm.
That is often the time where no one's going to mess with you for your job. So for me, I own a bridal store, and people are like, "Well, how does that relate to your historical fiction novels?" Well, it does and it doesn't. But what I've learned is that if I give myself one little sliver of time every single morning before I go to my store, there's three big things that happen. One, I'm working on a deadline and I have an hour, and that's all I have. I wake up most mornings at 6, or you hit snooze on your iPhone and it's 6:09 by the time it wakes you actually.
Yeah.
Right. Like, oh, 6:09, that's me. So I go downstairs, I hang out with my husband, we work out together every single morning in our back bedroom. That is our couple time. She's almost 10, our almost 10-year-old daughter sleeps through that. And so we just hang out, husband and wife, chit-chatting. Maybe we don't even talk. We just look at each other like, hey, good morning. Like we're in the same room together. And I think that bonding time for us is really important. Then from 7 to 8, I am at my laptop and I have a beautiful office that I'm in right now, and I usually write at the dining room table because I love to feel included, and that way my cats aren't messing with stuff. Anyway, that 7 to 8 is basically a modified Pomodoro method, and if you don't know what that is, it's basically setting a kitchen timer for, like, 20 minutes, 25 minutes, 30 minutes, and then you take, like, a 5-minute break. Well, for me, I know I have to start getting ready for work at 8. I have to take my daughter to school at 8:40. I have to be at my work, my store that I am in charge of by 9:15, 9:30. So my time is specifically parsed out where someone is expecting me, my daughter, someone is needing me, my store, and I cannot miss those time deadlines. So that's the second thing is you give yourself a set schedule so that you know you don't have any time to waste. And then the third thing is you make a to-do list and see how much you can get done within that hour time frame or the 25 minutes or the 40 minutes you were talking about. I have a very good friend named Molly Greeley, whose book Marvelous is one of the most stunning books I've ever read. And Molly always shares on social media how during the pickup line for her kid, she's sitting there, laptop, drafting, editing,
Mhm.
doing something because that is the time that she has carved out. She also has a full-time job. She also has written several novels. That's the thing is that if you have a book in you, you must give yourself the deadline to do it. And so my deadline for myself is every calendar year I draft a book. I've done that since 2022. It has been the working method for me. Sometimes it means in December I really crank it out. But that is my timeline for myself. But beyond that, that hour, that sacred hour that I get where I'm not lounging around, I'm not scrolling on my phone, I'm not on TikTok, I'm not listening to podcasts. Sometimes I am listening to my audiobooks to edit, but again, that is directly related to my author journey. That is how I managed to make this work. As someone who, just like you, when I have Tuesdays off most days of most weeks, and if I was like, I'm just gonna ride all day on Tuesday, guess what? I don't. The tomato in the backyard looks really ripe and ready for me to go out and pick it. My old
There's laundry to
dog is
do.
like, "There's laundry to do. I could really go do those dishes right now." Is that a new episode of Antiques Roadshow that they just
It
flashed across my screen? Like, I would not do it. And that's what happened to me during the COVID lockdowns. I was like, "I'm gonna write a book
Mhm.
during the COVID lockdowns." I was so desperate for news seeking because I wanted
Mhm.
change so badly that it didn't happen. Creativity during a time when everyone was at home should have skyrocketed, and it didn't because we were terrified of what was coming next.
Yeah.
So, for me, my biggest piece of advice for people who are trying to write a book or they've started and they can't finish it is give yourself a deadline, both with time. I have 30 minutes a day. Literally set your timer. Do it. Set your timer 30 minutes at the same time every day is extremely helpful too. And then give yourself a date deadline. For me, it's a calendar year. I know that my book 4 is running really behind right now, but I know that by December 31st, I will have typed the end because I give myself an hour a day to do it. I will say, as you get deeper into your author journey, it does become more difficult because I'm still promoting my first book. My second book is up for pre-order. So I'm editing that audiobook right now. I was in edits for that one earlier. My third book I am seeking publication for right now, and that one was drafted last year. And so my beta readers are reading it, and I'm going through meetings with them. And then my fourth book is swirling around in my brain, ready to get down on the page. So when you have 4 different books, it does
Yeah.
get a little more complicated, and you have to give yourself some grace. Like, I know that I have a big writing retreat coming up next June. I might not finish my 4th book by then, but guess what I will have done is still dedicated that hour a day to my author
Mhm.
journey. No matter what happens, that hour a day is my sacred time.
That's why it's so unsexy, right? To be like the key is consistency. No
Yes.
one wants to hear that. I did not want to hear that. I wanted all the hacks. I wanted all the, other tips. Anything other than someone telling me it's just about showing up and being consistent. And but you just get so much more done even
Mhm.
in those short windows of time because you just know you need to show up. And it was interesting for me just watching my own shift in, before I would sit down and I would have to do all these rituals to get into like the writing mode. I would journal a little bit. I would read something creative that would like hopefully spark something in me. I might need to listen to a couple songs or just, I don't know, to get into like that creative headspace. But
Mhm.
when I only had 40 minutes, my God, Jillian, I could just drop right in,
I know.
And it's
It's
just like the
great.
the time would fly by. and I would get, I would get like 1,200 words on a page when I was just like drafting in 40 minutes. Like, that's some incredible progress when you think about like the length of a book, and to get like 1,000 words in like every day, like it's not
Yeah.
going to take you that long to get to,
No.
85,000 words or whatever you're reaching for.
And I think
And
too,
so,
when you're doing that, you start to crave it, right?
yeah.
If
Yeah.
you don't have your 40 minutes, how do you feel?
Yeah, it feels weird. And I wasn't super, like, I didn't do mine every day because my schedule didn't
Mhm.
allow me to do it every day, but I knew at the beginning of the week which days I got to do it. And so then I would have these like ideas swirling around my head in the interim time, and I would be excited to have that
Yes.
time to like sit down, like, okay, now I get to finally flesh out this scene that I've been thinking about this week.
I think that's one of the most fun things for me too, is not only do I get excited about it, I also find myself craving that time. Like I'm like, "Ugh, I just wanna get to my writing in the morning," and then, sometimes I'll write ideas in my phone so I don't, like, lose it as mom brain does. But I think that's one of the best things too is that you actually start to form routines after you've done something for, like, 18 days in a row, I think it is psychologically. And so if you do this for basically 3 weeks in a row where you've set up a routine and your body will literally start to push you toward the chair. You
Mhm.
will want to go do it. That also is good for breaking bad habits, and that's why I've been exercising since 2018, almost every single day in some form in the morning because my body's like, "Oh, we're just gonna go do what we like to do." Our cells need this, our brain cells need this, our heart needs this, our psyche needs this to be able to just go and do the thing that you're used to doing. Creating routine is part of human nature. So if your routine becomes drafting a novel every single morning for 365 days, guess what's gonna happen? You're gonna write a novel.
Yeah, exactly. It's such a weird space to be in right now because I just have the memoir. I don't have multiple books to be working on like you are.
Mhm.
And so I just sent it off to my editor a couple days ago. And so it's so weird to know I have this like couple of weeks, plus then I've got some travel. And so I know I have about 6 weeks where I'm not going to work on it. And part of that feels really weird. Like I keep finding myself like kind of itchy for something creative, but also really excited to be able to take that level of space away from it so that I can
Mhm.
hopefully come back to it with really fresh eyes on it, which I think will be really helpful as I make those edits and changes.
Yeah,
Um,
my dad's a
but this,
writer too, and he calls that putting it to bed. Let her
yes,
sleep.
yes. It's so important, but it feels weird to not have another creative project. So I'm already starting to think about what the next thing will be. And that's just really exciting. As we wrap up this conversation today, though, I wonder if you might share a little bit about your publishing journey and how
Yeah.
you've navigated that without an agent.
Sure. So I think a lot of this happens to a lot of people. You get this like lightning bolt idea, and that's what most people's memoirs or novels are. And just like you said, like your brain is like, oh, I can't stop thinking about this. And that's what happened to me in 2020 at a zoo in Salina, Kansas, when I saw an Indian rhino for the first time. I went on a rabbit hole research thing where I looked up how many still exist and found that there's a historical rhino that traveled 18th century Europe for nearly 20 years with a Dutch ship captain. Where's the novel? I wrote it myself. There wasn't one. So
It's called
in
The Rhino Keeper.
21,
You can
it's
get
called
it
The
on
Rhino
Amazon.
Keeper. You can get it. Yeah, you can get it almost anywhere. You can get the audio, paperback, hardcover, and I have new award stickers to put on it because I just won a major award in the state of Kansas for that book. It's a 2025 notable book, which means every single library in the state of Kansas will have that book, which is
That's
incredible to me.
amazing.
Anyway, I wrote this book about this rhino, and it's a true story. And when you write about people and animals that are real, there's this ache in your gut that says, I have to make sure that I am doing a service to them and honoring them. And I could not ever put that manuscript in a drawer. Couldn't do it. So in 2023, I went to the Historical Novel Society conference in San Antonio, Texas, and I met my publisher there. I had queried a ton of agents. Actually, I queried about 60 agents, and I had like 10 full requests, which was absolutely insane amount of people who were requesting that manuscript. And I submitted to a small press called History Through Fiction because I thought, well, maybe I could skip the entire submission process and just have a book in my hands. And that's exactly what happened. Labor Day weekend 2023, I was literally sitting on my dad's couch, and my dad is an incredible author. He writes young adult sports books. And I remember getting the email that was a full request from the publisher. Then in early October, I got the email saying we would be honored to have this be one of our manuscripts. And in less than a year, I had a book in my hands.
Mm.
That timeline of idea to physical book in my hands in 2 or 3 years is very fast in the publishing industry. Very,
Yes.
very
Yeah.
fast. People are often like, "Well, why didn't you just indie publish it?" Because I don't have the skill set. Indie publishing is an incredible amount of talent. Cover design, interior layout, copy editing, all that stuff, the promotion, all of that. I needed a publisher to hold my hand and walk me through that. So I signed on with them for my second book, and my third book, well, I'll probably have news about my third book here pretty soon. But the reality is that when I was going through that process, I had a ton of rejection. And my biggest thing was flipping that rejection on its head and making people understand that not only is this part of it, but you can do something about it. I started what I call my rejection fence. So for every single rejection I got for the Rhino Keeper, I actually have the fence here. You want me to grab it?
Yes, would you?
Yeah, every single time that I got a rejection for the Rhino Keeper, I painted a flower on this piece of picket fence that I got from the antique mall. And I'm gonna show it to you. Hang on.
I love that. Listeners, this is something that Jillian did, and then she ultimately went kind of viral for when she posted the picture at the end of all of these flowers on this fence with the announcement that she had this publishing deal. Right, Jillian?
This
Is that
is
correct?
yes, this is side 1.
Okay.
Every single flower is a rejection, and this is side 2.
Well, you're also an artist. Look at you go.
You know what? It was a joy to paint flowers. I had to learn how to do it. One of my best friends is a painter, so she gave me a few tips. But then I got to paint my offer butterfly. See him?
Oh, yeah.
And I got to take this fence with me to my book launch. And I
How
even have a
fun.
little sticker, so if I have anybody out here looking for inspiration, I've had lots of people create rejection projects after that. But what it did was created this space for me to feel safe when I got a rejection, and I had control. I knew
Mhm.
I could only paint a flower, which I really enjoyed doing, if I had a rejection. And you probably just saw my child walk in through the door on that side. I could only paint a flower if I got a rejection. I enjoyed painting flowers. I wanted to paint them, but I couldn't. And so I took 5 minutes from my day. Sometimes I cried, sometimes I laughed, sometimes I rushed through those things. Sometimes I spent 20, 30 minutes on one flower. And what ended up happening was a psyche shift. And the psyche shift was, okay, I got a rejection. Now I get to go be creative in another way. That saved me and proved me right that there is space for every single type of book in this industry, and that if you try your hardest and don't give up after your first 5, that's like 60 rejections right there is what that is.
Mhm.
Um, you can make it. Your path might not be what you thought it would be originally, but there are ways for you to get your creativity out into the world. So now the rejection fence has become kind of like a staple. I feel like if anyone ever writes a book about me, they're going to be like, "Where's that fence?" Hopefully, it's in a museum by that point in time. So,
It's just such a beautiful sentiment to share. And I'm so glad that you're leaving us with that, finding a way to shift those things that you don't want into things that you do want. And so that you're
hmm
doing the action that you need to do in order to hopefully ultimately get, a publishing deal or get to just get your book out there. And Jillian, thank you so much for being here with us today. Where can people find you?
I'm on most platforms as at Jillian Forsberg. And you can find both of my books right now are on historythroughfiction.com. Yeah, I love connecting with readers and writers, so find me.
All right. Well, thank you, Jillian, and happy writing, everyone.